Hello and welcome back to our campfire. Are you ready for some scary stories? The first one is called The Thing in the Cabin. The old man was weak and sick. His body wouldn't last much longer. I made the old man get up and walk to the window. He looked out and saw them standing there in the snow. There were 4 hunters gathered outside the cabin. I saw them too, through his eyes. The hunters carried long guns, and they were shivering with the cold. One of them walked up and banged on the door. "Hello in there," he shouted. "Hello, we're lost and we need a place to stay for the night." I pulled the old man away from the window and made him bar the door. "We have a little money we can give you," the hunter shouted. "We just need a warm place to spend the night and a little food if you can spare it. We're freezing to death out here." I made the old man throw another log on the fire. "You don't need to be scared of us," the hunter said. "We'll leave our guns outside. We don't mean you any harm." I made the old man pick up his rifle and aim it through a slit in the cabin door. Then I giggled as I made him pull the trigger. There was a loud bang and one of the hunters dropped in the snow. He didn't know what hit him. The others were taken off guard. They dragged their friend's body away and took cover behind the trees. Gunshots exploded, ripping through the wooden door and breaking some of the windows. I released my hold on the old man's brain and he collapsed in a heap on the floor. I flew up the chimney and soared above the cabin. The gunshots stopped and the hunters retreated. They would be back. I flew high above the treetops and followed them. When they stopped, I drifted down and landed in the branches of a tall tree. The hunters were below me. They were setting up camp and building a fire. There were 3 of them now. A fat one, a skinny one, and a bearded one. The dead one lay nearby, staining the snow red with his blood. I had no use for him. The bearded one chopped wood with his axe. He looked healthy and strong. The skinny one was struggling to light the fire, while the fat one just sat there and watched. I listened as the fat one spoke to the others. He told them that they would camp there for the night, and in the morning, they would attack the cabin and kill the old man. I sat there in the branches of the tree and waited for night to come. When it was dark, the men curled up around their blazing fire and tried to get some sleep. I waited until they were lying still, and then I dropped down noiselessly into the snow. I crept towards the fat man who was wrapped up in his fur coat, snoring peacefully. Slowly, I reached out and took hold of the fat man's mind. I made him get up and walk over to where the dead man lay in the snow. I made him kneel down beside the corpse and take out his hunting knife. Then I made him saw through the neck of his dead friend. When he was done, I made him smear his face with blood. Then I made him pick up the severed head and carry it back to the fire. I released my hold on the fat man's mind, and that's where I left him, standing in front of the fire, smeared with blood, and holding the dead man's severed head. When he looked down and saw the head, he screamed and woke the others. They scrambled to their feet and stared in horror at the severed head the fat man was clutching. I watched it all from the safety of the trees. There were shouts and more screams as the skinny one and the bearded one grabbed their guns and blasted the fat man until he lay in a bloody heap on the snow. Now there were only 2. They sat by the fire and waited. I watched and waited too. They were waiting for dawn to arrive. Then they would attack the cabin and kill the old man. The bearded one threw more wood on the fire. He was too scared to sleep. The skinny one was weaker. He lay down and closed his eyes. I took my chance, creeping up to the skinny one and reaching into his mind. I made him take out his hunting knife. I made him slowly get to his feet. The bearded one stared at us, wondering what was going on. I made the skinny one leap across the flames and attack the bearded one. The skinny one was weak, and the bearded one was too strong for him. I knew he would lose the fight. I released his mind and flew into the trees to watch from a safe distance. There was a fierce struggle, but in the end the bearded one prevailed. He plunged the hunting knife into his friend's chest and left the skinny one to bleed out on the snow. Now there was only one. I flew back to the cabin and slipped down the chimney. The old man lay on the floor where I left him. I took hold of his mind again and we searched through the cabin. There was not much in the place that I could use. In a rusty metal box I found a pair of garden shears. The handles were rusty, but the blades were still sharp. I made the old man pick them up. I made him look out the window, and through his eyes I saw the bearded one coming across the snow, his gun at the ready. "Come out, old man." The bearded one cried, "Come out or I'll kill you." He fired his gun and a bullet ripped through the cabin door. I made the old man shout, "Okay, I'm coming out." I made him open the garden shears and place the blades at either side of his neck. Then I made him throw open the door and walk out into the sunlight. When the bearded one saw him, he stopped in his tracks and raised his gun. "What are you up to, old man?" he demanded. The old man didn't say a word. I wouldn't let him. The bearded man cautiously approached. "Why did you have to start shooting at us?" he asked. "We didn't mean you any harm. We just needed a place to stay." The old man resisted me, and for a moment I lost control. A thin wail escaped his lips. "Help me," he begged. I regained control of his mind, and, summoning all the strength he had in his withered arms, I made him slam the handles of the shears together. The blades snapped together, slicing off his head. It fell to the ground with a thud, then his body crumpled and collapsed in a bloody heap. My grip on his mind was broken, and I floated upwards. The bearded one was so shocked and stunned that all he could do was stare in horror at the terrible sight. I took advantage of his momentary weakness, dropping onto his shoulders and reaching into his brain to take charge. Now he was mine. After we dragged the bodies into the cabin, we feasted on the remains until I was satiated. I made the bearded man throw another log on the fire, and we sat down in the rocking chair. Together we rocked back and forth, enjoying the heat from the roaring flames. The bearded man was strong and healthy. His body would last a long time. The next one is called Writing on the Wall. When I was younger, there was a ruined building at the bottom of our street. All of the kids in the area kept well away from it, because the rumor was that it was haunted. The concrete walls of the old two-story building were cracked and crumbling. The windows were broken, and shards of glass lay all over the floor inside. One evening, as a test of courage, my best friend and I decided to explore the creepy old place. We climbed in through a window at the back of the building. The whole place was dirty, and there was a layer of mud on the wooden floor. As we dusted ourselves off, we looked up and were shocked to see that someone had written the words, "I am dead," on the wall near the ceiling. "Probably just some teenagers trying to scare kids," I said. "Yeah, probably," replied my friend nervously. We explored more of the rooms on the ground floor. In a room that appeared to have once been a kitchen of sorts, we found more writing on the wall. It read, "I am in a room upstairs." We walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. I led the way, and my friend followed close behind. I wasn't scared, but he was beginning to get a little jittery. When we came to the top of the stairs, we turned left and walked cautiously down the narrow hallway. At the end of the hallway was a closed door with some more ominous writing on it. "You will find me in this room." By now, my friend was shaking with fear. I was quite creeped out too, but I didn't want to show it. He told me he didn't want to go any further, but I insisted, telling him there was nothing to be afraid of. I turned the handle and the door creaked open. We stepped into the room and found it empty. There were 2 closed doors on either side. There was more creepy writing on the wall. It read, "My head is on the left and my body is on the right." As soon as my friend saw this, he completely lost his nerve. He gave a yelp and turned to run away. I caught hold of his arm, but he shook me off and fled out through the open door. I heard his footsteps disappearing off down the hallway. I held my ground. I was determined to be brave and overcome my fear. Mustering all my courage, I opened the door on the right and walked inside. I walked to the other side of the room, and on the wall, written in tiny letters, were the words, "My body is underneath." I looked down at the floor. I was standing on some more writing on the floorboards. I stepped back and saw the words, "My head is coming from the room behind you. Turn around." I heard the door behind me creaking and quickly turned. There was a shadow moving behind the door. Suddenly something rolled into the room and came to a rest against the wall. It was my friend's severed head. His dead, sightless eyes seemed to stare at me. Screaming in horror, I flung myself out through the open window and fell 2 stories to the ground. I landed on my side, breaking my arm. In horrible pain, I ran home crying and yelling for my parents. The police were called and they searched the old ruined building. At first, they didn't find anything. There wasn't even any writing on the wall. They combed the house from top to bottom, but didn't find any traces of my friend. Then they pried up the floorboards. His body was lying underneath. They never found his head. Alright, enjoys this extra scary story. This is a Japanese urban legend. A college student decided to visit one of his friends. He was excited because he hadn't seen his friend in a while. When he got to his friend's house, he found the young man lying in bed, hiding beneath the covers. They talked for a while, and the student found his friend's behavior very strange. After a while, he stood up to leave, and his friend suddenly said, "You can't go." His voice was urgent, and his face was deadly serious. "Why not?" asked the student. "She won't let you leave," replied his friend in a fearful voice. "She?" asked the student, looking around the room curiously. "Who's she?" He couldn't see anyone else in the room. "If you go, she will follow you and kill you," said his friend. The student stared at his friend incredulously. He saw his friend glance toward the chest of drawers in the corner of the room. He followed his friend's eyes, looking at the chest of drawers, and a chill ran down his spine. There, in shadows of the narrow 5 cm gap between the wall and chest of drawers, he saw a paper-thin woman staring back at him. In her hand, she was clutching an ice pick.